Video interviews can feel a little bit intimidating. Today, I'm going to share some top tips for success when you get invited for a video interview. So, the first thing to know is that broadly speaking, there are two types of video interview. There is the live interview, in which case you'll have other folks on the other end of the call on something like Zoom or Teams, some platform like that. These function largely the same way a regular in-person interview is going to function, but of course, you'll be on camera instead. The other kind I'll address a little bit more first because it can be a little bit more overwhelming, and this is the so-called one-way interview. These are the interviews when you simply get a link. And that link, when you click on it, will direct you to a landing page that will record your answers to the questions. Typically, with these one-way interviews, you're going to get the questions in advance, either before the interview itself, or it'll kind of pop the questions into the screen and give you a chunk of time to formulate your answer and then begin to answer it. They can be harder because there isn't an audience there, and it's really difficult to know if you're actually getting through to them, if they are resonating with your answer, that kind of thing. So, best thing to do for the one-way interviews is practice as much as you can and be really sure that you are actually answering the question they asked you. Be very specific, and that you are telling stories in the process. So just be thinking through that. Make sure your stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is true across the board, but it can be so much harder to remember that when there isn't an audience reacting to anything that you have to say. Standard interview that's on camera is going to function, as I said, very much similarly to a regular interview. But there are some tricks that I can give you and some errors that I see people make fairly frequently when they are on camera. So let's start with the setup. When you have an interview scheduled that you know is going to be on an online platform, you're going to want to do a few things to ensure video quality. Ideally, you will have a plain background behind you, something like my little freestanding shelf here, a bookshelf, a cabinet, something like that. Also, ideally, you will have a light source that is in front of you so that it illuminates your face and not behind you, which is going to wash you out and make it very hard for your interviewers to see you. These things aren't always possible, so do feel free to play around a little bit with things in your meeting. So you can do things like blur your background, put up one of those existing backgrounds. There are things like shots of space and grass and that sort of thing. Those are fine. I don't love those as a rule for myself because I find it distracting. Those pre-prepared backgrounds or even the photos you upload for yourself. Sometimes when you're talking, your hand will disappear or something like that. I just find that kind of annoying. But if you don't have a good space for your interview, you don't have something that you can put behind you that's going to look not distracting, those can be a fine option. There's some nice ones you can find of libraries and sort of generic looking office spaces and that kind of thing. So check those out. You'll want to play around beforehand, depending on what the platform is, so that you have a pretty solid idea of how to work it before you get into the interview. Then, with the light source, again, not always possible to have something that is in front of you illuminating your face, in which case just a straight overhead light is second best. The main thing, as I said, is to be sure there isn't a light source behind you. It's unpleasant for the interviewer to look at if it sort of shines right in their eyes, but also it's going to make your face invisible. Also, not something that we want. So play around with this. You might have to take your whatever you're using, a laptop, a phone, a tablet, wherever around some rooms in your house, right? You'll want to experiment so that you know you look pretty good in the setting. Not necessarily good like super cute, although that's a bonus, but good like it's you. You're on camera, they can see you. All right, next, think about your setup. What I mean by that is a perfect positioning for you in a video interview is to have two hand spaces over the top of your head. That frames you. They can tell that you're really there. It's not something weird like just your eyes. They can see all of you and they can see just enough of your torso that you're going to sort of read as a real person to them. So play around with it, adjust things as you need to so that enough of you is actually in the frame that it feels kind of normal on the other end to the interviewers. The last thing I'll say about the setup part of it, two last things. One is to make sure that your sound and video quality are as good as you can possibly get them. One of the really common challenges with this is that people will retreat to a private room sometimes to do something like an interview, which is a fabulous theory, but can sound quite echoey. So check the sound as much as you can beforehand. You might record a short video of yourself and play it back to see what the sound quality is like. And do make sure that your camera is positioned well so that you don't feel like you're craning your neck up or down or left or right in order to see it, to sort of be in frame with it. But then also, if you are really uncomfortable looking at yourself on camera, most video platforms have a hide self view option. It'll be called a handful of different things. So do play around with whatever platform they are using so that you can get comfortable with it. If you do opt to hide self view, don't do it right out of the gate. Make sure that you are well framed, that they can see you, that your face is well lit, all of that good stuff before you hide the view of yourself. And then the last thing I will say about this is you want to be really mindful of making eye contact. The challenge with a video interview is that there's not really a person in front of you. So eye contact actually means looking at either side of your camera, right? So what I have is a pair of googly eyes stuck to my camera. They remind me that those are the eyes that I need to be making eye contact with. So you'll see that right now it reads as though I am making eye contact with you. Whereas if I'm looking at the screen, it looks like I'm a little bit distracted. So try to, make this eye contact, draw a pair of eyeballs, something like that, and try to remember to be as relaxed as you can going into this. On the topic of being relaxed, if it's an actual live interview, the first thing to know is that just as is the case with an in-person interview, you can ask your interviewers to repeat the question. This is something that happens fairly often. We get nervous or kind of up in our own heads or distracted by something going on somewhere else. And we sort of lose what the question was. So always feel free to ask them to repeat the question. And then again, like I said earlier, be sure that you are actually answering the question they asked. This means you're going to need to pay a lot of attention when they're asking you the questions so you don't go off in the direction you wish they had asked you or tell an unrelated story. Just pay attention, be extra mindful of this. If you feel yourself start to get very nervous as you go through an interview, just give yourself a reminder to smile. I know this is one of those cheesy things. You've read all those books that say they can hear it in your voice, that kind of thing. More importantly, if you smile, you actually cue your brain to chill out a little bit. If you're smiling, a genuine smile, your brain goes, oh, it's not that bad. Oh, we're smiling. It's okay. Right? It also makes you read as friendlier to the interviewers, which is never a bad thing. Then also, as you're going through this process, feel free to take some time to answer the questions. Have a think about what they've asked and see if you can actually come up with a really good answer to the question. This is going to feel awkward to you initially because we're used to this very fast exchange of ideas in these online spaces. The trick to it is to make sure that they can tell that you are thinking. So try very hard not to just sit there as you think. Do feel free to take the time to think, but be sure that you are a little bit active. So you'll do, right? Or you will repeat the question, or you will say, ooh, that's a really good question. Give me a moment to think. You're just cueing them a little bit because in real life, they know that you haven't panicked and dropped the call. They know that your equipment is working because you're sitting in the room with them. It's not an issue in those spaces, but on camera, there are all kinds of technical things that might happen. And so we do really want to make sure that they know that you are present and really actively thinking about the question. If you find you need to buy yourself a little bit of extra time, you can have something like a water cup, water bottle, coffee cup, something like that. Take a little sip. Nice little, let me think about that kind of moment. Now, if you feel yourself starting to get really nervous, just do a real quick grounding, right? Just take a nice deep cleansing breath, feel your feet on the floor, feel your body in your chair, or if you have a stand desk, really just feel your feet on the floor. Really just take a nice deep breath, breathe through it, and think about sort of being present in this moment. And that will help you calm down a little bit as you feel the anxiety start to tick up. Also, be sure that you ask questions if they speak about something that you aren't familiar with. It's frequently the case that employers will have a proprietary name for a piece of software and have forgotten that it's called something different in other spaces. In that case, you have no way of knowing what it is unless you worked there previously. And so you can say, I'm so sorry, can you tell me what that is? Sometimes you'll also find that companies have outdated technology or very cutting edge technology. And so you've done something that is pretty much what they're asking about. You just didn't know that specific brand name. So just feel free to ask them. If you don't have any experience with anything similar to that, you're going to want to have a backup answer pretty much ready to go. And that's going to be something like, I haven't ever used a system like that before, but I'm very good with technology. For example, I taught myself to use Salesforce at my previous job. I had had no exposure to it before. But with a few online classes and just digging around within the system, I was able to make it work within the span of about a week and a half or something like that. The idea is to diffuse any concern that they might have around your ability to master any technology that they are using. Again, do try to remember to smile as much as you can in the process. Try to say the names of the folks in the room, if you will, once or twice, not too often. It is very distracting when someone is saying your name all the time. You know that, right? So once or twice, you'll say, Hey, thanks for asking that question, Julie. That's a really tough one. I think what I would do in that situation is. Right. So the once or twice that you would do in a normal conversation. If this isn't something that you ever do in a conversation, that is also okay. Just have a piece of paper and a pen handy so that you can write down the names of the folks who are interviewing you. So that when you send a thank you follow up afterwards, you can say the names of each person. If their full names appear in the message line here, like mine is, then you can also give them a little bit more, like you could send a personal email to each person, that sort of thing. So just pay attention to what their names are, even if you don't say them. On the topic of questions, you do want to be sure that you have a handful of your own prepared to ask them at the end of the process. Some of these will be things that you just wonder about, things like why this position is open, what their training process is like, that kind of thing. Ideally, avoiding such things that are the benefit to you, meaning the salary, stock options, paid time off, that kind of thing, unless they bring it up first. Salary can be a very tricky question in an interview. So, just in case, do a little bit of research on sites like Glassdoor, salary.com, those kinds of places, and see what the typical range is if it isn't stated in the job description. Now, you're going to lop off the very low end of that stated range, just regardless. You don't want to get lowballed. And if it's a very large range, then you're going to go for kind of the midsection of it. So let's say you found one of those job postings that says the range is, I don't know, 40 to 95. This is not helpful information, right? So you're going to go for that mid zone of it, and you will say something like, if they ask you, yeah, well, it looks like, based on my research, a typical salary range for this position is somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000 a year. And depending on benefits, I think I'm okay with that. Something like that, right? Ideally, higher is better, but that's the idea, kind of the pattern you adhere to when you answer these questions. If you can't find any information anywhere, then you can if asked a direct question, say something a little more generic that's along the lines of, I am willing to consider any fair offer. Fair is a really important keyword here because you're not willing to consider a terrible lowball offer. So just make sure that you don't forget to say fair or reasonable or whatever works for you in this context. And then, as much as you can, proceed with confidence in this interview process. This is an exercise in selling yourself, your abilities, your overlapping skills, all of that. And so you do want to try very hard to approach this as the most confident version of yourself. There are loads of tips floating around online about how to increase your confidence before something like an interview. What I like to do is just give myself a quick little pep talk before something like that, in which I remind myself of some of my successes. Ideally recent, they don't have to be if you can't think of anything recent. Just have a really strong sense of you as an accomplished individual going into the interview, and that's going to help lift you up a little bit as well. Now, of course, the really great thing about video interviews is only your top half has to be presentable to the camera. If you're not wearing pants at all, or if you're wearing sweats or shorts or something, I definitely recommend you don't stand up when you're on camera. But beyond that, wear whatever you want on your lower half, which could include nothing at all, as long as you don't accidentally show them a little bit too much. The point is to be comfortable, but to know that your top half is quite presentable. So, it's going to give you an extra little lift of confidence when you see yourself on camera and think, oh, I don't look terrible today, right? So, professional, put together, appropriate for the type of role you're looking for. That's all of the stuff to keep in mind for your upper half in the process of an interview. Try to avoid any loud jewelry. I mean, actually, jingly loud. You can also try to avoid loud colors, but the jingly sound will actually mostly serve as a distraction to you if you are anxious about things, as you may very well be. Um, Muted colors are a little bit better on balance in this process. But for instance, a lot of people will tell you that red is a power color. And if your favorite color is green, you should feel free to wear green. The point is you want to make sure that it looks all right on camera. So you want to avoid super busy patterns, things like really thin pinstripes or anything like that, because those can just confuse the camera lens. It'll get a little bit wigged out and do some funny things. And you want to be sure that you look like you look good. You look like how you would like to present your face to the world. So do a little test run of your outfit before the actual interview, and then just try to be happy, smiley, confident. There's no reason that they wouldn't give you this job, is the mindset you go into the process with. All right, I hope that is helpful. Please feel free to send any questions you have around any of this my way. I'll be glad to answer them in a future video. Thanks for watching.